Hey, there we are. Let me put the experts on top. Hold on a second. We're live, gentlemen.
Experts. We got experts in here.
Y'all the experts.
Jay Staples is the expert.
Let's hold on a second. Let me get this streaming thing off of there. All right. We ready to do this. Folks in the chat, y'all ready for us to do this? Let's get it. Welcome into Inside Carolina's Game Plan Podcast. I am your host, Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes, Jason Staples. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. A little bit after 9, gentlemen, Thursday, November 10th. Hope all is well with each of you. Greg, I'll keep it the same. It's worked for eight times this season. So I'll start with you. Carolina and Wake Forest. It's funny, we talked yesterday with somebody, and we've talked in the past, the more you win, the bigger they get. Well, another big one for Carolina and Winston on Saturday night.
It is, and it's a very interesting setup for North Carolina. As we've talked about before, so many times that North Carolina has gotten to November, and the games really don't have that much importance. But if you go back to 15, they mattered a lot and really mattered when they went up to Virginia Tech. Granted, the coastal race was a lot closer at that point in time. And so while North Carolina has yet to officially clinch the coastal, I think ESPN has them at like 98.6% chance of winning. Basically, Carolina needs to win one of these final 3 games or have Duke or Georgia Tech lose another one. And Carolina will be in Charlotte. So high likelihood of that happening. North Carolina would like nothing more than to score a big win against a good team on Saturday night to make that happen. Of course, Wake Forest has lost 2 in a row, so no longer in the top 25, which kind of stinks. I think this was setting up to be a really fun top 25 matchup. And we'll dive into some of Wake's issues the last couple of weeks. But Carolina's trucking along. And it's really that interesting conversation, Tommy, of and you see it in the fan base. It's a unique setup where you have fans who they don't care how North Carolina got to 8-1 because Carolina's never at 8-1. It's a rarity that this happens, and they're just happy that Carolina is there. And then you got another group is saying, "Okay, Carolina's 8-1. That's great," but they still aren't playing necessarily to their potential because the defense is just kind of languishing a bit. And that's a good problem to have. It's not a matter of your fans are going at each other because the team stinks. It's because they really want to enjoy the moment while also saying, okay, well, if Carolina's defense really comes along, well, maybe they can win these last 3. And if you win the last 3, maybe you get into the top 10 going into the ACC championship game. So then you can really start dreaming, right? So North Carolina's in great shape. The fun thing about this matchup is they've scored 225 points the last 2 games, which is ridiculous. People make a big deal about the over-under. I'm not sure what it is right now. I think it's 77, 78.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, they blew through that number the last 2 years. So that's it's hard to vote against that over-under as ridiculous as it may be.
Yeah, we should have put that one on the over-under show way back in August. Over-under 100 points in the Wake Carolina game.
I'd have taken it over right then.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. That Greg makes an interesting point, and that's what we've talked about. Carolina's 8-1. They were 8-1 in 15, then maybe 8-1 in 97. I mean, I was around, but I can't think that far back coherently. And then maybe the last time before that was 80 or something, or 81. I mean, something crazy.
I think they were undefeated in 97 until
Judgment Day.
Until Judgment Day, yeah, which was in November 7th, maybe.
Yeah, I think that was 7.
So they so you've got those 2, 2 times in the modern era almost. And folks, there's so much consternation, and I don't know if I understand it. I get it. I asked Mac about it, about the defense. I asked Chiswick about the defense. I don't think Mac cared for my question on Wednesday about it. But I ask it because people want to know. But Jason, Carolina's 8-1, and they're playing Wake Forest, a team that's defense is maybe a shade better, not much. What do you think about going into this? Let me ask you this. Compared to where you were preseason to now, what has changed or what has stayed the same, in your opinion, of this ball game?
On the Wake side, I don't think a whole lot has changed. I mean, they are banged up, which has been a factor. I think that's something that you have to take into account. But I thought this year's Wake team would be very offense heavy and struggle on defense. I think they've been a little less consistent on offense this year, at least the last few weeks, than I thought they'd be. But again, they've been a little banged up, and Hartman has had a little trouble. But other than that, they've been pretty straightforward. I mean, Carolina offensively is pretty close to what I expected. I thought they might be able to run it a little better, and I was a little concerned about where they'd be early in the year without Antoine Green. But I thought once they had Green and Downs both on the field, I thought this is pretty close to what they look like passing wise. So I don't think a whole lot has changed in that respect on those in those three domains. On the defensive side, I really thought Carolina would be better on the defensive line this year, would be able to dictate to offenses more to this point in the season than they have. And I thought their corners would be a little better. Actually, I thought their corners would be significantly better. So, that I think that all in all, Carolina's defense has been a tick below where I thought they'd be. I mean, I thought they'd be pretty good this year. Now, the thing is, in terms of their in conference performance, they've been pretty close to what Greg, you and I talked about as their as on that preview show. We talked about what was the number for points per game that we were figuring somewhere. What was it, like under 29 or something like that was around the over under, and we were figuring that was a pretty fair number. And actually in conference, they're below that. So, I mean, in that respect, they've actually, in the thing that matters most, which is points given up, they've been basically on expectation. I just think it's been a little uglier at times than we thought it'd be. They've gotten beat a little bit more on the edge, and then they've gotten pushed around a little bit up front at times when I didn't expect. But otherwise, I think it's basically the game we thought it would be coming in.
It's kind of crazy how that works, isn't it, Greg? I mean, everything that's happened. There's not a person in the world that thought Carolina would be 8-1 with a worse defense than last year. None. Nobody. And here we are. Sam Hartman, was out at the beginning of the year, has struggled the last 2 weeks, but he's still Sam Hartman, and it's still that Wake Forest offense. All the questions in the chat are going to be about defense. Go ahead and tell you guys that. No secret. But Greg, as far as where Carolina is, to Jason's point about the defense being better in conference play, I still think, and no, they have not been good, but I still think that App State game has skewed it so much that I don't think anything they can do short of completely shutting down Wake Forest on Saturday will change the perception, will it?
Yeah, but I understand the App State game, and yes, it was abnormal and it's an outlier, if you will. You can say the same about the ECU game in 2014. Where I think part of the issue is because those numbers look better in conference. A lot of that is the fact that North Carolina hasn't faced many good offenses. I'm pretty sure Wake is going to be the first top 50 offense, at least in FEI, that Carolina's faced this year. Or at least the top first. I think I'd have to look it up. I had it and I lost it. But I think maybe it's the first top 25 and third top 50. I think that's probably what it is. So they've benefited by not having the offensive opponents that they did last year in ACC play. Remember, there's a lot of really good offensive teams last year. It just hasn't really been the case this year. It's been kind of a defensive heavy. And we talked about that earlier in the year of, the Coastal's wide open, but a lot of these teams don't have really good offenses, but they're pretty good defensively. Well, Carolina's the opposite. I mean, the defense is not really good, but they have a really good offense. And Carolina has capitalized on that. We talked last week, Virginia came in averaging 14 points a game against FBS opponents. They scored 28. So when you say, well, they only scored 28, it's not bad, right? But when they're doubling their average against FBS opposition, that's not good. And so that's kind of lending to some of this debate and argument on the message board. But as Jason talked about last week, there have been strides made. He can dive into it more if he chooses, but they look more technically sound in the fundamentals than they did in September. And so even though the actual stats may not look dramatically better, I do think it's a situation where they have gotten better. I will throw this in here. When you look at defensive drive efficiencies, North Carolina has had 4 straight games dating back to the Virginia Tech game was positive, of course, but 4 straight games of negative defensive efficiency. They've got 6 on the year. 2014, Carolina had 7. Issue with 2014, of course, was they had some really bad games, like 3 or 4 really bad games, and then a couple good ones. This defense is not near to that extreme other than the Notre Dame and App State games, but they've been closer to that average mark, just haven't really been able to get there, and that kind of gets into this conversation.
Can you explain what that means, the negative efficiency rating?
So this is FEI. So all FEI stuff is per possession scoring advantage. So basically, when your offense, your defense takes the field against an average opponent, how do they fare? And so Carolina in the last 4 games, the defense hasn't won. The defense has given up more points per possession on average against kind of your adjusted numbers than the opponent than that you would expect. And so like Virginia is a good example. I mean, it was a negative 1.12, which is not good. Anything more than 1 is a poor defensive performance. And that speaks to what we just said. Virginia was averaging 14 points a game against FBS competition. They scored double that. And so you're going to get those negative marks when you do that, even though we're not talking about 61 points like App State scored.
All right, Jason. So how's Carolina 8-1? Tell me the one person or maybe the 2 people that are responsible for 8-1 at this point in the season. Who might that be?
Give me a second, Jason. Let me think about this.
I think I saw him on SportsCenter earlier this evening.
Yeah, I think we can just go ahead and skip to the next question because I think I think the people who only watch Carolina basketball know the answer to that question.
Hey, let me ask you this though, Jason. You mentioned Antoine Green, and Josh Downs and Green have looked phenomenal. And I think we know the answer on Downs because he's been good. He was good last year. How much of it is those guys really playing exceptionally well, and how much of it is Drake makes those guys look that much better?
I think those guys have played really well. If you look at Drake's performance before those guys got back in the lineup, it was good. I mean, we were talking about how, man, it looks like he hasn't missed a beat. So, I mean, he made those guys. I mean, that shows you kind of he's making guys look great. But at the same time, when you look at the one-on-one matchups, anytime one of those guys has a one-on-one matchup, he's wide open. And that makes it easy for Drake. So it's one of those recursive things where May makes his receivers look better, and he happens to have 2 NFL receivers. So when you make Josh Downs look better, wow, he was already pretty good. I think actually of them, Green has probably helped May more in that respect. Or I'll say May has probably helped Green more than he has Downs. Downs is a guy. There have been some places where Downs has been really frustrated because Drake hasn't missed many throws or many reads, but the few that he has missed have generally been in that direction. So, and I think we saw last year at different points when Sam Howell actually pulled the trigger to go to Antoine Green. He made some plays, especially down the stretch. But there were times where, I was watching. I looked at all 22 angles on things and going, "Oh my gosh, you got a wide open throw here," and he never even looked at him. And Drake's ability to see the field and his confidence in pulling the trigger to Antoine Green in the way that he makes a lot of the throws that May throws best, or throws that take advantage of what Green's able to do. I think that relationship has been very good for Green. I think it's really helped Green's draft stock, among other things. But I think it's a recursive thing. I mean, each of them is making each position group is making the other look good, which is exactly the synergy you want between those two positions.
I think it's fascinating that even when they were out, Drake May was still good. He's better with them in there, but early it was Georgia State and App State that he didn't have either one of those guys.
Yeah. And granted, if there was anybody on the schedule that you didn't want to have those guys against, it's going to be in those first 3 games.
Right.
So, I mean, it is a little bit different because Green and Downs have been doing it against the meat of the schedule. And so that part needs to be taken into account. But yeah, I mean, May made it look easy with the other guys against a little bit lesser competition.
It's just fascinating to me that he just throws whoever's open. And you mentioned how last year, I remember some of your breakdowns and some of the stuff we looked at. There were guys running wide open, never glanced that way because he was trailing Josh a lot and watching that. Greg, looking at May's performance, and we talked to Joe Lizzie yesterday, and I like it. I like having a different opinion, not an echo chamber. And some people on the message boards or whatever, I think there was a little bit of missing the point of what he was talking about as far as why he won't win the Heisman this year and all that other stuff. But anyway, what gets me, Greg, about Drake, and then we can move into the actual game plan portion, is that folks are noticing and folks are paying attention other than just jumping on the bandwagon. I mean, there's guys getting in to the meat and crux of it when they're talking about Drake May, other than just saying, "Oh yeah, look at those numbers. They're fascinating." They're talking about what he does well and all that. And that's what I think. Somebody said his height, the biggest difference from him and Howell.
Well, the height helps, but no, I think there's more to it than that.
If he was the same height as Howell, he'd still be pretty close to what he is.
Right. His ability to get rid of the ball as quick as he does, and as Jason has said, he's still got growth to go through, right? I mean, he's still a young guy. He's only played 9 games as a starter. But it's more than that. And he understands where to put the ball. The play that Jason broke down on the corner route that Josh Downs ran, I mean, Drake read it perfectly, and he stepped into the throw and let it go before Josh ever turned around. I mean, that's NFL quality stuff there. And let me say this too. People haven't asked why we had Joe on. And Tommy, to your point about echo chamber, we could have had somebody from Charlotte who works for the ACC network or ESPN come on. And guess what? They're going to tell you the exact same thing that we're going to tell you, because they're in this area and they understand North Carolina's setup. They understand a lot about the program and the ACC footprint. Joe's not from around here. He's from New Jersey. And so he looks at it from a national perspective that you're not going to get in the state of North Carolina. It's a completely different view. And so what he says is how a lot of people around the country are kind of looking at it. You don't have to agree with him, but I think he's right. I think the perception, if it was just a stat-driven award, individual stat-driven award, then there's no question Drake May would be top 2 or 3. It's not. Never has been, or at least hadn't been in the last 25 years. Your team has to win, and you have to be in a situation like what you said, where people really notice you. And it's not just, hey, that's the redshirt freshman kid from Carolina. He had another good game. It's like, whoa, we know what Drake can do. He's been doing it all year. There he goes again. There's a difference there for a lot of these Heisman voters. And so he's got an uphill battle. But if Carolina can keep winning and he can get up close to that top 10 ranking, If he keeps doing what he's doing, he's going to make it very difficult for those people not to extend an invite to New York.
Jason, it's a question I was going to ask, or I'm going to ask Drake when we have some availability next week when he's there. He got the week off this week. But when a quarterback is going through his progressions, does he know or is he processing who that guy is? You know what I mean? Like, or does he just see an open jersey? I mean, Drake may know, he's smart as can be, but is I've always wondered that, and the reason I asked that question is, and I said it on this or one of the shows a couple weeks ago, if it's me running the route and I'm wide open, he's basically got to stick it on me because I can't run. But if I'm fast, you know what I'm saying? Like, does he know who he's throwing to, or is he just throwing to whichever one of his guys appears open?
Okay, quickly, I want to go revisit something that Greg was talking about before.
All right.
So it's not just about the oh well, oh wow, that redshirt freshman's really playing well or whatever. You're right about that, but I think the difference, the thing that you've got to have if you're going to be a Heisman winner, is you have to have a couple marquee games against teams that are regarded as marquee teams in prime time. If you don't have that, you're not winning the award. Partly because a lot of the voters just don't watch the games.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I see in the chat folks saying, RG3 won the award, won the Heisman with, without a great Baylor team.
He had some phenomenal plays in games.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he had some big performances in night games, like at Oklahoma. Right? That's a brand team. So if you're not on a brand team, then you have to beat or absolutely torch a brand team, I would say at least twice. And, once sort of earlier in the year to get the attention, and then late in the year to really cement yourself as that guy. You have to beat a team and you have to show yourself against a team that the voters recognize. And the problem is, it's basically Carolina's schedule. I mean, Drake is not going to have the opportunity to play again, to get that kind of marquee game until Clemson. And then at that point, unless, he drops like 8 touchdowns against Clemson and they manage to win, in a tight one because of his heroics, he's still not going to be elevated to number 1 there, just because teams are going to go, well, yeah, he's put up great numbers, but I mean, it's the Andre Ware phenomenon, right? Now, Andre Ware won it, but that was a different era. And, look at where the guys who've won it have played the last 15, 20 years. You have to be at a brand place or a place that plays multiple big brand programs in that year and then show out in those games. And Carolina, just the schedule did not stack up for that. But he'll probably be the favorite going in next year, honestly. So anyway.
And State can be a big game because State's going to be.
Yeah, if they keep winning,
That's
they
going
can
to
be
be
a big game,
10,
but the problem
game.
is they're not a brand game.
Yeah.
So.
And it's on Friday when nobody's watching.
And Tommy, I'm cautiously bringing this up. I'm bringing it up now because I don't know if I want to revisit it before the State game. But what have fans criticized Dave Doran for over the years and having successful seasons? Playing weak schedules. Mm-hmm. According to ESPN FPI, Carolina right now, kind of to Jason's point, the 84th strength of schedule. NC State hadn't had one that bad in a long time. So Wake will help with that. You want NC State to keep winning, so they can help with that. But this just hasn't been, outside of Notre Dame, just has not really been any teams that are even kind of really fringe top 25. And that's hurt Drake as well.
And even Notre Dame being a 3-loss team. I mean, if he'd put up 5 touchdowns and that Notre Dame team had beaten Ohio State earlier in the year, that then the national narrative looks a little different there too. So, I mean, but that Notre Dame team was off of 2 losses already. And that killed any buzz going into that game. And so much depends on building buzz. I mean, the Heisman campaign is a PR campaign where it's about building the buzz over the year to get people, to get the herd to vote for you. Anyway, going back to your question, Tommy, about whether a quarterback knows the does he know who he's looking at in addition to what he's looking at? It depends a little bit on the quarterback. Some quarterbacks are a little more agnostic on that. So they know, you do know when you line up, and you're instructed to know, but exactly how that weights in a quarterback's decision-making process differs. So, I mean, this goes back to what you just said before. I mean, you look at last year, Sam would lock in at times on one guy. He knew where he wanted to go, and he would get locked in on that guy because that's, and he did it some, in all three of his years. Before it was Newsom, sometimes, and then other times, Diami, he had eyes for Diami, and it was just going to Diami no matter what. So there are a couple factors that come into play here. One is if you trust all of your receivers, then you can basically pick and pop depending on whatever defense you see. You just take whatever you got. If you don't trust your certain receivers as much as others, you might default to something else first, even though that might be the first progression. You're gonna speed through it quicker. That's third progression, and you're just not gonna make it there because you don't trust the guy. So those are factors. But then some of it's temperament of the quarterback. And this is where I think May is different. And May has the temperament that I really like in a quarterback, which is sort of the point guard approach to playing quarterback, which is you're open, you're getting it. I'm giving you layups, guys. and when you have that kind of guy with that kind of mentality, yeah, he knows who his matchups are. And if it's like 3rd and 8, then you've got a concept called that is going to involve a one-on-one for the slot, and that's Josh Downs. Well, maybe you give that a little extra time because he's going to win that one-on-one. So that's where you start to make some of those adjustments to it. But you when you're a quarterback, what you do, the first thing you do when you step to the line of scrimmage is you evaluate front and okay, where are my blitz threats? And then you check and you're doing that while checking safety. So do I have 2 high, 1 high? Where's my blitz threats? Okay, checking my protection. And now I know what concept I have called, and I want to see, okay, where are my one-on-ones? Okay, and now I've got a one-on-one here, and I know that guy can't cover that guy. So you do take that into account. And sometimes what you do is you bump one of the progressions earlier in the read progression. So you got, 1, 2, 3. Well, you can also go 3, 2, 1 if you like that 3 matchup and you think that's going to pop. So it just depends a little bit on that, where you do take that into account and you do default to the guy that you're pretty confident is going to be open, but there is some variance there between quarterbacks, and some guys are going to default to, I'm just going to put it on you regardless of who you are. The other factor that you mentioned is if you're throwing to Tommy, you got to know, I'm throwing a deep ball. I'm not putting it quite as far out there. When I was playing, I had quarterbacks that overthrew me a little bit more because, you're throwing to Crefonzo Thorpe, who ran a 4.29 laser 40 on, 1 rep, and then you're throwing to me on the next one. And I never ran a 4.29 on a laser. I was a little slower than that. You got to take a little bit, you got to toss that a little bit less distance for me than you would for him. So you do have to have that awareness as well. And that's where having experience with each player, knowing that, okay, this guy, he likes it above his head more, whereas this guy likes to run under it a little bit more. And that about certain guys, and the best quarterbacks actually adjust to that as well. So, I know Antoine is going to go get it no matter where I put it out there. He's going to run under it. Whereas, JJ, maybe that guy, I'm going to put it up a little bit and he likes to go up and grab it, and that's where he's going to be best. So, those things, and you start to, that's graduate level quarterback play. You start to adjust to that stuff.
Yeah, and that's where all that summer work comes in. with those guys. Let's talk about Johnny T-Shirt. JohnnyT-Shirt.com sponsors the podcast, sponsors Inside Carolina. Great friends of you, the Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. I say this all the time because I mean it all the time. They take care of you if you're a premium subscriber on the message boards. You get Jason's breakdowns. We talk about recruiting all the time. That's worth its weight in gold on Inside Carolina. Jason Staples breakdowns, film breakdowns are certainly worth that as well if you're a premium subscriber. Go check it out. Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street, Johnny T-Shirt online. Get your 10%. Take care of them. It's Christmas time, folks. Hard to believe. There's a Christmas tree waiting to be set up in my garage. It's ridiculous. It's November 10th. That means you better start ordering your stuff online. National guys pay the bills. It's the game plan. Wake Carolina. All right, boys. It's 9:34 on the East Coast. Let's talk about the game itself here. We said earlier that it's pretty much the same game we thought it would be when the season started. I'm going to try to get some questions not related to how much Carolina needs to blitz to start with. So I'm going to come to you first, Greg Slagle. I asked him a question, or I asked them to ask me some non-defensive Carolina defense questions, and here's what we got. Slagle says, what can Carolina do to get better run production? Greg, what you got?
Better run production. That's a good question. That's probably a better one for Jason to answer. But I think the offensive line has made strides. I think they're a little bit better than last year. They just don't have the explosive back, and there's some talent in the young guys. But when you talk about British Brooks being out, he's the guy they were counting on. Caleb Hood getting hurt. They've really kind of run through the numbers, and Elijah Green is his turn. And so I think it really is just a matter more so of not the offensive line as much as it's been in years past that have caused some issues, but it's just the talent that they have in the running back room. It's young and inexperienced for the most part, and that's one of the reasons. And then in terms of why Carolina hasn't run the ball as effectively or maybe as much, I mean, there's a reason Drake May is passing the ball so much. It's because really he needs to. He's played from behind a lot. Carolina has trailed. Well, he's got, what is it now, 4 second half comebacks. So that plays a role into it as well.
Jason, my first inclination is running game. Why you need running game? We got Drake May. I mean, I'm almost serious, but I think Elijah Green might be a difference maker here in a game like this. Jason, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is you got to remember that the last 2 defenses they played, one of the things we said going into the game is it's going to be tough to run against these guys. I mean, Virginia, as bad as they've been offensively, they're good run defense. They're good. Actually, there's a good defense overall. I mean, we said that going in, like, guys, this is going to be a tough sledding. I mean, Greg, I don't think either one of us picked more than, we picked them in the 30s in terms of Carolina's score.
Like 31, 34, yeah.
Yeah, so we both knew that this was going to be a game where you'd have to earn your points because Virginia doesn't make mistakes, and they're physical up front, and they stop the run. And then, of course, Pitt, I mean, Narduzzi, at this point, he's become a caricature because he's willing to run the football even when throwing it's going to win. He's willing to go down with the ship, making sure he runs it on offense just to run it because he wants to win the right way. He'd rather lose running the football than win, with Mark Whipple throwing the football all over the yard. Okay, well, whatever. But his defensive approach goes the same way. He's going to do everything to take away the run. And so you're just not going to run the ball a ton against those teams. I've actually thought they've done well the last couple of weeks running the football. I mean, they were efficient when they ran it against Virginia and against Pitt. And when you're running it against those 2 teams, you're doing pretty well. So, what can they do to get more production out of the running game? I think play a defense that's more like Wake Forest's is a good place to start. And I do think Elijah Green has shown some real promise there. I mean, he and Hood have been the 2 best backs this year in terms of actually running the football. And now that Hood's out, I mean, it's got to be Green. And the way that he ran it against Virginia, I mean, he ran physical. He ran the ball really well. And he's got some burst. He's got some speed. He can hit it in the home run. He can hit home runs once he gets in the open field. Although those are harder to get against Wake because they'll play over the top. So, I think they'll be able to run the ball some against this Wake defense. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you go through Wake's schedule, they've given up some rushing yards on the year, and their front is not what Carolina's faced the last couple weeks.
Yeah, Nick Whitfield said Carolina needs to be balanced. I mean, Carolina's averaging 145 yards a game in ACC play or something to that effect on the ground. I think Elijah Green will make some plays on Saturday. They might be on some swing passes or something out of the backfield. Petaway returning kicks could do something. Marion puts the ball on the ground, or did a couple times, and Mack has said when they've got a locker room full of running backs, if you put it on the ground, you're going to watch. And Green took advantage of that opportunity and has sort of stepped up. I still think, and I'm not going to talk about Carolina's offense a lot because I think it'll be a 53 point performance here. But I think it's a Drake May day again. Greg, I don't know any reason to come off of that. If we're talking about somebody ran for 150 yards, like Slagle said, then I think maybe we'll change the narrative. But until I see it, I'm going to believe that Drake May does what Drake May has to do for Carolina.
Yeah, a couple things here. In terms of run defense, as Jason said, Wake's had some really good games. I mean, last week they were good because they wanted to see if the young freshman for State can beat them. And they held State to 115 yards rushing. Louisville ran for 211. Boston College ran for 56. BC sucks. Army ran for 225. That's triple option, right? I mean, they're going to get yards. Florida State ran for 112. Clemson ran for 188. So they've been kind of up and down. And so Carolina in ACC play, averaging 4 yards per carry. I think when you talk about Drake May, though, Wake's defense is vastly improved. Bringing in Brad Lambert from Purdue, he's made some great improvements, but it's still really middle of the road. So they're not top 100 like they were last year, but they're still 50th, 60th in most of these stats, and that's something that Drake can take advantage of. I think one key stat to look at in ACC play, Wake Forest is 13th in quarterback rating defense, 149.3. Of course, Drake is, I think, 181. But get this, Wake has allowed 13 touchdowns without an interception in ACC play. So that sounds a lot like Drake May is going to have a good evening.
Yeah, somebody said he's going to throw to the tight ends. Is Nesbitt healthy? I hadn't really heard a whole lot about Nesbitt. I would assume we hadn't heard anything terribly negative. But Morales, this is a game he could have a good game in. But it's May, Downs, and Green, and then you sort of go off of that, and it could be Green and Green, so we can have a law firm. But I think just Carolina's going to do what they do. So let's go ahead and switch to the defense. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and predict 52, 51 or something like that, and everybody has a heart attack. But
well, look,
Jason,
77, Jason, Tommy, 77 is only 11 touchdowns.
And that dude, what was that? That guy did it. SMU guy did that,
right?
Didn't he?
So it's not that far fetched. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Jason, what? Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you just a succinct question. Will Gene Chizik blitz Sam Hartman?
Not if he's that smart. Not if he's as smart as I think he might be.
Do tell.
So if you want to go back and watch a team just absolutely get shelled, go back and watch Wake Forest against Clemson. Right? Wake Forest scored 45 points against Clemson. Now, Clemson's pretty good defensively. Right? They're real good. What they did, though, is they came into that game dead set on pressuring Sam Hartman. We're going to pressure him, and we're going to single cover him. And Sam Hartman threw for 371 yards and 5 touchdowns on 9 yards per attempt. because
Against
those
who
wide
again?
receivers.
Who was that? What team was that against?
That was against Clemson. Okay. Because Clemson, through 3 quarters, insisted on, we're going to blitz, we're going to take away the run, we're going to make you one-dimensional, and we're going to, screw that slow mesh. We're going to hit your quarterback. And Wake Forest said, okay, we'll take those one-on-one matchups. Most. And A.T. Perry, actually, I got to look up A.T. Perry's numbers in this game because they were ridiculous. A.T. Perry against Clemson. It was not just A.T. Perry. So he was 4 for 51 and a touchdown. Let's see. Jamal Banks against Clemson was 6 catches for 141 and 2 touchdowns. And see, Jamal Banks is another of those 6'3", 6'4" guys that grow on trees out there. A.T. Perry's 6'5". Donovan Green is another. Donovan Green against Clemson, let's see, was 2 catches for 53 and 2 touchdowns, so scored on both of his catches. Those guys feasted every time Clemson brought pressure and left one-on-one on the corner. So, I'm sure that there are some folks out there who are like, well, NC State last week showed the blueprint. You got to get pressure on Hartman, and then, that'll cause some problems. Well, yeah, but NC State might have the best secondary in the conference, right? I mean, if there's a team that can go one-on-one a little bit more, then they can. And secondly, they're also a very different scheme. They're playing a 3-3 stack. And NC State's scheme is based on bringing pressure from looks that you can't you don't necessarily know where the pressure is coming from. That's what they try to do. So if you go with a 2x2 formation, they're gonna have some sort of 3-3 look. They're gonna be they're gonna bring 4 rushers, but one of them is gonna be a blitzer from somewhere, and you're not sure whether it's gonna be Mike Backer, whether it's gonna be Will Backer, whether it's gonna be Sam Backer, whether it's gonna be one of the nickels or any of these things. One of the safeties, a nickel. They're gonna bring 4 guys most of the time. You just don't know who the 4th guy is. And then sometimes, a good amount of the time, they're going to bring a 5th guy, and they believe in bringing 5 a lot. They don't bring 6 a bunch. So when they bring 5, they're still playing, pretty safe in the back. And again, they've got some good defensive backs there. Carolina, we saw what Pitt did when Carolina went, all right, well, we're going to load up and stop the run. We're going to bring pressure, and we're going to force your quarterback to beat us down the field. Well, you had some receivers running free down the field. Ultimately, though, they just missed them. Do we really think Sam Hartman's going to miss all of those?
Slovis was bad.
Slovis was bad. And Carolina counted on that. That was the right call. That's what we said they should do is, look, make Slovis beat you. I don't think the right play against Wake Forest is make Sam Hartman beat you. Right? I think you need to be judicious. I think you need to bring pressure sometimes, but you need to be careful when you do it. And what you don't want to do is bring 6-7 guys and leave yourself exposed on the back end, or they're just going to shell you, because those are NFL receivers out there. They got 3 NFL receivers on their team. So to me, yes, bring some pressure. And I think we'll see that some. But you've got to pick your spots, and you got to make sure you disguise when you're doing it. Otherwise, you've got to just make sure that you stay over top of those wide receivers. And my thing is, use your corner's length to disrupt those receivers and try to take away what they do best in that regard. But force them to beat you with something other than going straight downfield. And you know what? If they're going to run the football on you a little bit, I mean, their run game has not been great this year. Make them beat you with the running game. I mean,
and Hartman doesn't run it much.
Yeah, I mean, look at their run game right now. They're averaging 3.22 yards per play in the run game.
2.58
They averaged
in ACC play.
Yeah, they averaged 0.68 yards per carry against NC State. They averaged 2 yards per carry against Louisville. 3.29 yards per carry against Boston College. So to me, you force this team to beat you running the football. That's what you do. And if they can do that, well, then you start to bring a little bit more pressure. But I think you make them prove that they can beat you running the football, and you try to you make Sam Hartman hand the ball off a little bit more. Take away the verticals.
How you play the slow well, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Hang on, let me jump in here. One of these days, Jason Staples is going to be so far off, I'm going to nail his rear end to the wall. It's coming.
It's not
today. Is not that day. I've got some stats to back up everything he just said. And look, the point of this is blitzing only works if you get to the quarterback. If you don't, all you've done is taken somebody out of coverage. Here's some PFF numbers, which I think are just phenomenal. Sam Hartman, when kept clean, has a 91.2 offensive grade. That's elite. Adjusted completion percentage, 73, 1,950 yards, 9.4 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, 5 picks. Under pressure, 49.2 grade. 47% completion, 6.9 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Here's what matters. When blitzed, Sam Hartman has an 84.5 grade with a 72% adjusted completion percentage, 9.3 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
Wow, if you're going to 17 touchdowns and 4 interceptions when blitzed. Good God.
If you blitz him, you got to get home. Otherwise, he's going to eat you alive. So everything Jason just said is exactly right.
Actually, it's interesting. His grade on the year is, I just went over to his page. His grade on the year is lower when not blitzed than when blitzed.
Yeah, so Sam Hartman, when he has time to think about it, he is worse than when he has to make a snap decision and get the ball out.
Well, I think it has more to do with his wide receivers are elite when they're in one-on-one situations. I think that really is what it is. Because when he's blitzed, he's going, oh, I got that one-on-one, and I've got an NFL wide receiver against whatever DB he's up against. I'm just going to let him go up and win. And those guys win over and over and over again. And you guys remember, I watched this team beat Florida State earlier in the year, and Florida State actually outgained them in yards per play on both sides of the ball. You don't normally lose when you do that. Florida State outplayed them overall. But Wake Forest just flat out won several one-on-one matchups with those wide receivers on 3rd and long. There was one touchdown where you can go back and watch it. The FSU corner could not have been in much better position against this, jump ball fade situation. The corner is all over him. He's in phase. He's in position to make the play. He reaches to go get the ball, and he just misses by like 4 inches, while the receiver, who's another 3 or 4 inches taller, just pulls that ball in, makes a great catch, touchdown on 3rd down. And that's the difference in the game. And they had like 4 or 5 of those where those receivers just won, and they were just better than Florida State's defensive backs. And, that's concerning because, frankly, Florida State's corners have played better on the year than Carolina's have for most of the year. So I think you want to avoid putting yourself in positions where Hartman can just go, oh, all right, blitz. All right, pull it, throw it up to A.T. Perry. Oh, there's a matchup I like. All right, just throw to that guy. He's in one-on-one. Yeah, good luck with that.
So, and I didn't watch Wake a lot against State because that just violates everything I believe in. But what I did see is I didn't see them running that slow mesh a lot against State. I mean, they've done it against Carolina, and somebody just threw it in the chat, and I was going there. That makes guys like Cameron Kelly, Biggers, and them, Greg, doesn't that make them very important in a game like this if Wake's going to try to play it that way?
Yeah, and how do you make them go quicker with that?
Hit everybody.
Yeah, you get pressure. You win the line of scrimmage. And that's what Carolina has struggled with last couple of years is Carolina has not been able to really move the line of scrimmage, and so Hartman's able just to sit back there. I also think the fact that Wake has struggled offensively, running the ball, has probably affected that a little bit. Jason, I'll let you expand on that, but I did want to ask you one thing. I played golf with a buddy of mine the other day who's a longtime high school football coach, and he said that Wake Forest is one of the few offenses or few teams that when you go to clinics, they won't tell you how they do the slow mesh and kind of the design. Is that accurate?
Yep.
I just say we're not covering that today.
Well, they don't want to get into the details of exactly how they coach that, and how they specifically install and all of that, because it's proprietary. So they're not real forthcoming with that. And then another group that's kind of tough to get stuff from is the Briles clan. Historically, they've been real proprietary about their stuff. I remember I was at a clinic with Kendall Briles, and then I started using their terminology on a couple things, and mentioned and then mentioned something that I had film of and whatever, and he kind of looked at me like I saw this, like, how did you get that? And like, and it was one of those, and I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I know it's kind of hard to get your stuff. He's like, yes, it is. So that's Wake's similar to that. Some coaches are more forthcoming than that, in that respect. The coaches that have their thing, like other people don't do this thing, some of those coaches get real proprietary about that, and that's a couple of them.
It's like, what is it? The KFC recipe?
Yeah.
The
thing is about the slow mesh, I don't think it's actually all that complicated. I mean, I think you can reverse engineer it from tape. The issue is committing the time to practice. It's something you can't just do part-time. Like, you can't do it as like, we're going to spend 5-10% of our practice on this. You have to commit to that as an offensive philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
And most teams are not willing to do that because it's a little risky.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to get your quarterback hit.
Well, that's the thing. You got to make them pay. It's kind of like when teams would run the option all the time. You just got to hit the quarterback and hit the running back, or hit the quarterback every time. And I said the KFC comment. They've been kind of knuckleheads lately, so I retract that comment. But looking at it, somebody said, what's the likelihood that Chiswick's going to actually brings pressure? And we've covered it. It's not. You don't bring pressure. You have to get pressure. You can bring extra bodies, but if they don't get covered or don't get through, then guys are wide open. On the slow mesh, it always looks like Hartman, to me, Jason, is reading the safety.
He is. He's reading third level. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as he triggers down, then he's throwing over the top of it. And that's why Cam Kelly and Biggers and Don Chapman and those guys have got to be good in their eyes. You love the eye discipline. I think I saw somebody said, if I hear Jason Staples say eye discipline again, but it's on point. But in reality here, Carolina's front four has got to be very good.
That's the key to this game.
Yeah, and that, for me, I picked Carolina to lose to Wake in the preseason, and that's why I'm going to stick with that, is because the front four, without the guys they're missing, that's troublesome to me, Greg. Can they hold up and do their jobs with all those guys missing? And I don't see it happening. Let me throw up this Chad Maupin comment.
And while you're doing that, let me make one other observation. So when they do that slow mesh, he's not always reading safety. Part of the issue is that they're reading an adjuster. So depending on the concept that they have layered with it, he's reading a different guy. So sometimes he's reading if you've got a nickel in, sometimes he's reading that guy. It's more of a standard RPO. They're just giving it more time to develop. But there are other times where they're taking a shot and they're reading a safety, and that if that safety triggers, it's all over.
The question is, how many times do they get called for offensive linemen downfield on that?
They shouldn't when they're doing slow mesh, because those guys are in double teams. So that's one of the things that makes it so hard for them to defend them. Is what they do is they double team both of. Oftentimes they'll duo you, basically. They'll double team both of your offensive tackles, or your defensive tackles, that is, or at least double the most threatening one, But as often as not, you watch them and they've got 2 double teams on the front, and then they're driving those guys back. And that's what gives Hartman the ability to ride forward as far as he does, because that double team forces you to establishes that pocket in front. And then the problem is you can't just tell your end to take off upfield and get to the quarterback there, because if he does, then he just hands it off and now you got 9 yards. So they're keeping your ends have to play the run, and then your tackles are getting double teamed. So it's hard to get pressure there. You have to have really 2 guys break through the line of scrimmage to be able to do it. And that gets tricky.
Yeah, let me throw it up, Chad Maupin, to the point, and I'm trusting these are accurate stats, Chad. 3 turnovers versus Louisville and State when the defense only rushed 3. 2 of those when rushing 5, 6 when rushing only 4. So they turned it over when teams were not blitzing or were not blitzing a bunch. And that's an interesting thing to watch. And to your point, Jason, you had more guys in coverage that were able to get some deflections and make some plays, and not having those wide receivers just running free and taking advantage of whatever corners. Storm Duck and Tony Grimes are going to have to be fantastic against those guys on the outside.
Those are some dudes at wide receiver.
Man, it's crazy, and it's Wake Forest.
And the weird thing about the last 2 games for Wake is they had a disastrous third quarter against Louisville. I think 6 turnovers led to 35 Cardinal points in that quarter.
And Louisville did nothing different. That's the thing. They just threw it to them.
And that gets to my next point. If you look at the NC State game, there were 2 atrocious throws by Hartman. I mean, one of the ones that you're talking about, Tommy, he threw it into triple coverage, and it wasn't like pressured or anything. He just made a really bad read. So just a couple games here where Hartman has not been his best. And of course, Carolina would like that to continue.
Let me ask the question before we get out of here. And Slagle, I'm going to have to start charging you for all the questions, man. Love you. You're awesome. Why does Carolina struggle so much defending the pass when they drop 8? Jason, I'm going to let you go here, because this is the one thing I did tweet during one of the games, is if you're not going to get pressure and they're still going to be wide open, do something different. and so Carolina has struggled covering on the back end. Just sort of explain the issues you've seen there. And I think that is a big frustration is for Carolina fans. You're seeing them, rush 3 or have 3 defensive linemen, 3 or 4, no pressure, and they're still wide open. Help us here.
Part of it is the no pressure. Rushing 3 doesn't mean you get no pressure, right?
If you had Lawrence Taylor, you could rush 1 and get pressure.
Right. Yeah. So rushing 3 should not mean that there's 0 pressure on the quarterback. It means that maybe you get a little less. But part of the problem has been that they've not pressured the quarterback as much when they've rushed 3 as they've wanted. Part of it, though, has to do with there have been some in each of these games, teams have been able to determine that they like a matchup or 2, and they've targeted some guys. And there's also been some communication issues. You've got, some young guys playing with some older guys that aren't always reliable. It's a mixture of things, but I mean, they're not pattern matching for one thing, as well as I'd like to see, which pattern matching involves the matchup part of the matchup zone thing. And, they're allowing too much space, and there's been a lot of success on any sort of rub route or any sort of switch concept, matching up to bunch. Teams have thrown that sort of thing at them that force them to have to adjust or to pass guys off. And guys just get open in seams that if you're playing really good zone defense shouldn't be there. So I think it's a mixture of things, but you put those 2 things together and you're going to wind up with frustration.
Yeah, and Duck's been a lot better in the last couple of weeks, healthy and all that. Let's get to the predictions. And Slagle, you come find us in Lawrence Joel parking lot or in the Bowles lot next couple of weeks, and we'll settle up, my friend. We'll take care of it. I will pay you in ways that are much better than money for all the questions, on-point questions you ask. Greg, predictions. Let's go.
So I want to throw this stat out since this could be our stat of the day. North Carolina, one of the issues they've had, of course, is generating pressure. Is also kind of getting into the backfield. Carolina ranks 126 nationally in tackles for loss, with 4 a game. Wake Forest is 25th nationally, with right at 7 a game. We've talked about this before, but Jay Bateman was really a fan of the idea that if you're able to generate pressure, you're doing all right. And if you get a tackle for loss on a possession, then there's a 25% chance of that possession leading to points. So that's a pretty stark difference. I'm not exactly sure what the normal one is, but I think, 52% of the time without a negative play, the average offense scores. Half of that with a tackle for loss. So that's one to watch. But I also think that the bigger issue, we've already talked about it, for Wake is they've really struggled to run the ball. And Carolina has shown life in recent weeks of being able to limit the damage in run defense. And so it really is a matter of which team is more effective in forcing some punts. And that's what it comes down to. The way Drake May has been playing compared with how Sam Hartman has been the last 2 weeks, I've got Carolina in an upset on this one. I've got North Carolina winning this one. And you know what? For good measure, let's make it 3 years in a row. I've got North Carolina winning 52-51.
Oh, my gosh.
Greg Barnes. It's funny. Greg gets off the beat and starts predicting Carolina wins. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, it just happens to coincide with when Carolina's winning. Imagine that.
Oh, yeah. Wait a minute. When'd you start? No, you were there for 15. That makes sense. Jason, what you got?
Yeah, so the thing that I keep coming back to is the running game for Wake, and the fact that they've really struggled to run it the last 3 weeks against teams that, NC State's run defense is legit. That's the best run defense in the conference. Louisville's run defense is okay, but what they did against Louisville was just an anomaly. And then BC's pretty good on run defense. So, you look at that and you're like, okay, well, they don't have any explosive plays in the running game. They don't hit for explosive plays. And that kind of fits into the wheelhouse for what Carolina wants to do defensively. So in some ways that matches up well. The one thing that keeps bothering me is I did watch that Florida State Wake Forest game, and they ran the ball 51 times against FSU. And they averaged 3.35 yards per play, but it was enough to beat FSU. So that's the concern that I have is, I think that's the right approach. You have to, if they run the ball 45 times in this game, I think you win the game. But the concern is what happens if they do run the ball 45 times and they have a couple of those big plays that are able to neutralize that, and then they win. So I think this is going to be a close game. This is going to be a tough game. I am going to pick Carolina to win it. I think for a lot of the same reasons you said, Drake May has been the more consistent quarterback. And I think if there's a team in the conference that has equal or better wide receivers, it's North Carolina. And I think Carolina can cause them offensively the same kinds of problems that they can cause Carolina. And I don't think Wake Forest defense is a whole lot better than Carolina's. So all told, I think the other thing is that Wake has shown in recent weeks a propensity to turn the ball over, and Carolina hasn't turned it over a bunch. So playing those numbers, I think I wouldn't call it an upset. It would have been an upset a couple weeks ago. And I'm not sure that they would have beaten this Wake Forest team, if they'd played 5 weeks ago. I think that at that time frame where the teams were at that point, Carolina's gotten better. And I think this is a Wake team you wanted to play a little bit later in the year once they got a little more banged up. So I'm going to go with a little bit lower scoring game in this one, though, because I think Carolina is going to force them to run the football more. So it's going to run a little bit more clock. But I think this one's going to be, and I say lower scoring game, but it's still ridiculously high. I'm going to go with Carolina winning this one 45-38.
Take the over, Tommy.
Oh, I'm taking the over without question. I mean, I'm ridiculous. So when I was picking this season, we got to the Miami game, and all of y'all told me not to do it, and I did it. I took Carolina to beat Miami. And now I'm reading Mark Williams. Shout out to Mark Williams. Since y'all give me a hard time hollering Slagle's name, I'm going to say Mark Williams. Do you see his quote in the chat? Bowman said it the other day. Drake May turns 50-50 games into 80-20 games. And so
It's a good quote.
I'm going to change my pick, even though I don't like Carolina playing in Winston. It's been a weird place to play.
It's a weird place to play for everybody.
Over the last few years. I'm going to say Carolina. I think I said 52-51 earlier, Greg, just joking, but you stole that. I'm going to say 49-46, and I would wager Hartman's got the ball in his hands at the end. This is Drake May's day, Drake May's season. And if the dude keeps doing it like as he's done it, he's going to be in New York. That's all I got. I've changed my prediction. I don't feel good about it. I like the 10-2 prediction on the season, but I'll ride with the hot hand, and Drake is the hot hand. Greg Barnes, Jason Staples. Anything else, fellas? I will tell you this, Jason. 8 o'clock Sunday morning, I'm going to need you to carry the load because I'm going to Winston, and I'm driving home after that game. So, or I'm going to carry my book bag with my computer and my headset. So I might be doing it on a park bench somewhere in Winston or in Chapel Hill, but we'll get it done. 8 o'clock the day after podcast. With Buck Sanders, Jason Staples, and myself. Greg Barnes and I will be back next week for this show and the next level. Inside Carolina, Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Listen to Inside Carolina live before Carolina and Wake on Saturday. Thanks, fellas.